She smeared cake across the face of the wrong woman and lost a $4.2 billion lifeline before dessert cooled. The Sapphire Hall at the Harborview Grand had a way of swallowing sound. Crystal chandeliers hovered like frozen rain. A string quartet paused mid-phrase. 300 guests turned as one. And in the bright middle of the room, Chloe Grant pressed a red velvet cake into a stranger's face and said, "Clear enough for every camera. Back to the kitchen. People like you don't belong here." The frosting was scarlet against the woman's brown skin, a wild mask that slipped into her hair and down the collar of a navy dress. She didn't raise a hand to wipe it away. She didn't step back. She didn't blink. She stood very still, eyes focused as if she were measuring the room like a map only she could read. Her name was Lena Brooks. No one knew that yet, but they would. Phones tilted up like a field of metal flowers turning to sun. A collective gasp scratched through the silence. A few guests laughed too loudly, then looked around to see who else was laughing and fell quiet. Near the bar, a man whispered, "Did she really say that?" Another answered, "She did." Chloe raised a microphone and let it thrum against her palm, bracelets clinking. "Everyone," she called. "This is what happens when gatecrashers try to climb where they don't fit. Cheap suit, fake badge, and now a lesson." Uneasy chuckles rippled. No one moved to help. The red velvet slid down Lena's cheek in a slow line. Evan Lee, the hotel manager, stepped from the wings like a man walking on thin ice. "Ms. Grant, perhaps we—" "Not perhaps, Evan," Chloe cut in. "Everyone needs to see." Lena bent to gather the papers that had scattered when the cake hit. As she reached for a page, a heel came down on her fingers. Sharp pain shot through her hand. Chloe looked straight into the nearest phone and, without lowering her voice, said, "Don't touch stolen documents." The sting in Lena's knuckles told her what she already knew. This night would mark people for a long time. She lifted her chin. Behind the frosting, her expression was clean and calm, almost curious. "Ms. Grant," she said quietly, loud enough for the microphone to find her. "There's been a misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" Chloe circled her like a victor admiring a trophy. She was small, sleek, ruthless. "You were rifling through private files. People like you don't get to pretend your way in. Security." The phrase hung there, "people like you." It did not drift, it fell. It landed in the pit of 300 stomachs and lay heavy there. Lena looked at Evan Lee and reached into her purse with her free hand. "Please hold this," she said, offering a card. He took it, he glanced down. The color drained out of his face as if someone had pulled a plug. "Ms. Grant," he said softly. "We should—" Chloe snatched the card. "The worst fake I've ever seen," she announced. "Executive Vice President at— what is this? Apex Systems Cloud, please?" Executives don't look like her, silence sharpened. Somewhere a champagne flute chimed against marble. In the far corner, an elderly woman set her glass down very carefully and folded her hands. Lena pulled her phone from her clutch. The screen was spidered with fine cracks from a heel. Chloe's probably, but it still glowed. She tapped, waited, tapped again. The room was so quiet that the tiny click of her fingernail on glass sounded like a drumstick on the rim. "Mr. Lee," Lena said, turning to the manager. "May I cast to your projection system?" Evan nodded once, hard, as if waking from a spell. "Yes." A moment later, the wall showed a secure portal. Apex Systems Executive Access. A Logan, a passkey, a profile, a photo that matched the woman with cake in her hair. Name Dr. Lena Brooks. Title Executive Vice President, Apex Cloud Platforms. Authority Global Partnerships. The reaction was not a gasp. It was a wave. People stepped back without meaning to. Others leaned forward instinctively. The quartet lifted their bows and then lowered them again. On a dozen different social feeds, comments sped by so fast they became a blur. The live count spiked. 100,000. 110. Chloe's laugh was sharp and brief, like breaking a twig. "An actress with a fake portal, what's new? We all know filters can do anything." She smiled at the cameras. "Don't be fooled." Evan raised a hand. "I'll call the company." He tapped a number, one used when celebrities came and NDAs mattered. He pressed speaker. The ring cut the room into moments. "Apex Systems Global Headquarters," a calm voice answered. "How may I direct your call?" "Please connect me with Dr. Lena Brooks's office," Evan said. One click. Two. Then, "This is Nora, Executive Assistant to Dr. Brooks." Heads turned toward Lena as if pulled by a string. The frosting felt cold against her scalp now. Sugar can turn icy when air hits it. She spoke clearly, no tremor, as if she were asking for a glass of water. Nora, it's Lena. I'm at the Harborview Grand. We've had a dessert incident. On the speaker, Nora sucked in breath. We're seeing the live feed right now. Are you safe? I am, Lena said. Thank you. Another wave moved through the room. It wasn't sound. It was the shift that happens when a story catches up to the truth. A door near the dais opened and a man hurried in. Silver hair not quite in place. Tie loosened as if he had torn it while walking. Robert Grant, CEO of Grant Manufacturing, scanned the wall, saw the credentials, and stopped as though he had walked into a glass pane. He turned to his daughter, Chloe, and his voice was too low for the microphones when he said her name, but the shape of his mouth was clear. Dad, Chloe said brightly, relief pouring off her in warm waves. Perfect timing. She was snooping. I handled it. No one laughed. Not even Chloe's friends. Robert faced Lena. His eyes took in the red velvet on her cheek, the calm, the projection on the wall. He looked older by 10 years than he had when he walked in. The muscles along his jaw fluttered and went still. Dr. Brooks, he said, and the microphones caught every syllable. I am horrified. Chloe lifted the mic again, hand trembling now in a way that made her bracelets clatter. You're all blind. Look at her, covered in cake, pretending. You really think... Lena spoke over her, voice firm but low. Ms. Grant called me names that have chased people for generations. She pressed a heel into my hand. She did it on your official live stream, minutes before a signing that would have given Grant Manufacturing a future measured in jobs, not headlines. The number hit the room like thunder hitting water. It spread and echoed. $4.2 billion. Phones lifted higher. The live count rolled again. 180,000, 90, 200. Robert swayed as if his knees had briefly forgotten their work. He steadied himself with one hand on the edge of a table, and then did something few men like him ever do. He lowered himself to the floor. On his knees, he looked up not at his daughter, but at the woman she had harmed. Please, he said, the word raw, unadorned. Please don't punish 12,000 people for one person's pride. We need this partnership. Chloe stared at him as if he had just switched places with her. Dad, get up. She's lying. Can't you see? Lena set her briefcase on the table with the ease of someone who has done it 1,000 times. She opened it. Inside, the contract lay smooth and bright. Frosting had smudged the edge, a red thumbprint on clean paper. She held it up. This is the Apex Grant Agreement. It would have secured your company's next 10 years, but the signing window has closed. Timelines matter in my world. Tonight, your daughter threw more than cake. A chorus of voices broke in. Questions, protests, someone calling for a lawyer, someone else saying, my God, over and over. Journalists pressed closer, elbows sharp as knives. The comments on the stream became a storm. Robert reached up from his knees, palms open. We will remove her from the company. We will do whatever you ask. Just give us one more hour, one more. Lena shook her head. I don't make exceptions that punish my own people later. If I bend the rules because I feel sorry, I teach my team that rules are soft. They are not. Chloe's face changed then, not to sorrow, to fear. It moved over her features the way cloud cover crosses a bright day. She stepped back. She wiped her fingers on a napkin and left smears of red she could not hide. Security approached, not with a rush, but with the kind of deliberation that says, we do this every day. The chief stopped at Chloe's shoulder. Ms. Grant, he said in a voice that made space around itself. You assaulted a guest. We have witnesses and 6 camera angles. It was cake, Chloe said, but her voice didn't rise to the same height anymore. It was a joke. You can't. The cuffs clicked. It was a tiny sound, but everyone heard it. A few people clapped, brittle, as if they needed to do something with their hands. Others looked away. No one laughed. Lena did not move. She let the cameras see what they came to see. She let the weight of it find its level. Then she spoke to the room. Not as a victim or a conqueror, but as a person who had chosen her line years ago and learned how to stand on it. Actions leave receipts, she said. Tonight you witnessed them being tallied. The live count tipped past 250,000. On screens everywhere, strangers leaned closer to watch a fall and a choice. When the hall finally emptied, After statements, after signatures that had nothing to do with deals, after apologies and the hush that follows public shame, Lena stepped into the corridor. The marble was cool under her heels. The night outside pressed its face to the glass. She could feel the weight of exhaustion settle across her shoulders. Beneath it was a different weight, older and steadier, the one that comes from knowing you did not leave yourself behind in a hard moment. She moved toward the revolving doors. In the reflection, she did not see a woman in a ruined dress. She saw a leader who had made it clear that respect is not a courtesy from the powerful. It is a debt owed between equals. Arrogance will always pretend it can pay with charm. Exposure shows the check won't clear. At the curb, a driver held a door. Lena paused, red velvet flaking from a curl. She smiled, not from triumph, but from the private joy of telling the truth out loud and letting it do its work. Somewhere, 12,000 people were checking feeds, texting, wondering. Somewhere, someone who had been told people like you was watching and thinking quietly. Not today. Back inside, Evan stood alone in the dim hall, watching the screens go black one by one. He folded Lena's card into his pocket as if it were made of blown glass. He would remember her voice for years, the calm, not the volume. Across town, in a corner office suddenly too large, Robert sat with his elbows on his desk, the city glittering below like a field of broken promises. The phone on the corner flashed with messages from board members, from banks, from cousins he barely remembered. He pressed his thumbs into his temples and wished fervently, uselessly, that time could run in place for a single hour. In a small room with bad lighting and a metal bench, Chloe stared at her wrists, red where the cuffs had pressed. The joke had stopped being a joke a long time ago, but she could not pick the exact second it ended. That was the trick with power. It made you think you could always find your way back. Nora, back at Apex, stood at Lena's door with a mug of tea neither of them would drink. She watched the live replay with her arms crossed and felt both pride and a burn of old anger. She typed a message, "Home?" Lena wrote back, "Soon." Lena's car pulled into traffic and the city moved around her as if nothing had happened. That too was part of the lesson. The world does not stop for our dramas. It absorbs them. It asks the next question. Tomorrow would bring statements. It would bring rumors and attempted apologies with careful wording. It would bring words like accountability from mouths that had never formed them before. It would bring lawyers who would have strong opinions about frosting, intent, and the difference between cruelty and a prank. It would bring offers from other companies to pick up the contract that had slipped from Grant's hands. It would bring long meetings where people would say, "We can't be seen as political," and then decide what they already knew. But tonight belonged to something simpler. One person had tried to shrink another down to size. It hadn't worked. The insult had boomeranged and knocked a crown clean off. At a stoplight, Lena leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes for a single slow breath. When she opened them, the light was green. She moved forward. The city glowed, the air cool enough to sharpen edges, the sky clear enough to show a few stubborn stars. Somewhere, someone replayed the moment when Nora's voice came through the speaker. Somewhere, someone rewound to the heel on Lena's hand and paused to feel the sting. Somewhere, a young woman sat on a couch and realized she did not have to laugh along next time. What is the price of a careless insult? Tonight, it was $4.2 billion. Tomorrow, it might be something softer and heavier. Trust, pride, the ability to look your people in the eye. Numbers make headlines. Consequences make habits. And habits draw the line of who we are. Lena reached her building. She thanked the driver. She took the elevator alone. In the mirror, she pulled a crumb of cake from her hair and held it for a second between finger and thumb. She was surprised to find herself smiling. Not because a rival had fallen, because the truth had carried farther than a stage and stayed there. She walked down the hallway, the sound of her steps quiet and sure. She unlocked her door. She did not switch on the overhead light. She stood in the soft glow from the city and let it settle around her. The phone on the kitchen counter buzzed twice, then stilled. She left it there. Across the river, a younger engineer at Grant sat with his laptop open and his heart in his mouth. He read a rumor in a private chat that the deal might be revived with another firm. He typed, "Does this mean layoffs are off?" No one answered. He stared at the dot that meant someone was typing. It blinked. It vanished. He closed the chat and opened a new window and wrote to his mother. I don't know yet, but I'm okay. In a townhouse stuffed with beautiful things, a woman who had laughed at the party earlier washed her face twice and still felt unclean. She scrolled through comments and saw her own reflection in the black screen between them. She touched her cheek and said out loud to an empty room, "I'm sorry," and did not know to whom she was speaking. None of this changed what had happened in the Sapphire Hall. None of it softened the words Chloe had chosen. None of it put the cake back on the table. The night was now a story told by strangers, and strangers are not gentle, but somewhere else quiet, unseen. That story planted itself in a place where shame and pride and rule of law grow beside each other. It would lie there for a while and then break ground as something with muscle. The next morning, Lena would wear her hair back and keep her bandaged hand low. She would thank her team for turning off their notifications after midnight. She would read 3 emails and delete 19. She would draft a message to partners that said only what needed saying. She would ask Nora to reschedule the site visit. She would not mention cake. When Nora asked whether to return Robert's call, she would nod. She would not enjoy it. She would do it because decency is not a performance. It is a habit you choose when no one is grading you. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, the city breathed. The hall was empty. The chandeliers waited. Somewhere in storage, a cake stand shone. Somewhere in a coat pocket, Evan's hand found a business card and held it as if it were proof that steadiness exists. And in one quiet apartment, a woman looked at the smear of red on a folded contract and felt no rage left, only clarity. She knew why she had stood still while the frosting slid. She knew why she had spoken when silence would have been easier. She knew that each time someone says, "People like you," a reckoning begins, even if it takes a while to arrive. If you were there, you would remember the hush in the second before the portal appeared on the wall. You would remember the exact tone of Nora's voice. You would remember the little crack sound of a cuff locking. You would remember how it felt to be in a room where arrogance finally had to sit down and listen. You might even remember the last thing Lena said before she left. The sentence that did not try to be grand and somehow was. Respect, she told them, looking from face to face, is not a favor. And then she walked away, while the story kept walking on without her.